Dr. Marcus Webb slammed his fist into the nursing station counter so hard the monitor tipped sideways. "Get that woman off my floor," he snapped loud enough for the entire ward to hear. "I don't care what HR says. I don't want a girl who smells like antiseptic and bad decisions touching my patients." He pointed straight at Emily Foster, his finger 2 inches from her face. "You're a liability. You're soft, you're slow, and you don't belong in a military hospital. Go back to whatever small-town clinic raised you." Emily didn't flinch. She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds, then turned back to her chart. Nobody defended her. Nobody said a word. They never did. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow Emily's story all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell us what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The Ballard Military Medical Center sat inside a forward operating zone that most civilians didn't know existed on any map. It had been built fast and built hard concrete, reinforced with steel plating along the exterior walls, blast-resistant windows, generator backups for the backups. The staff who worked there understood that their patients were not ordinary patients. They were operators, intelligence assets, pilots, and special forces personnel who arrived in critical condition and left either walking or in transfer bags. The nurses who worked the night shift had seen things that would have broken most people in half. They moved fast, spoke in shorthand, and didn't waste sentiment on anything that couldn't be measured in a chart. Emily Foster had been there for 11 weeks. She was 29 years old, 5'6" with dark hair. She kept pulled tight and hands that were steadier than anyone in the building had ever noticed. She had arrived with a personnel file that listed her as a registered nurse with 3 years of civilian hospital experience and a transfer request that had been rubber-stamped without much scrutiny. She didn't talk about herself. She didn't bring personal photographs to put on the station wall. She showed up early, stayed late, and did her job without commentary. Dr. Marcus Webb had decided inside the first week that he didn't like her. It wasn't anything specific he would have told you if you'd asked. It was instinct. She was too quiet. She didn't ask for his approval the way the younger nurses did. She didn't laugh at his jokes. She had a habit of standing very still in the middle of a crisis that he found deeply unsettling because it didn't look like paralysis, it looked like calculation. And Marcus Webb was a man who needed to be the most composed person in the room. "You didn't respike the fluids on bed 4, he said to her that evening, appearing behind her with his arms crossed. "That patient's been running low for 20 minutes. Emily didn't look up from the medication log. "I respiked it 40 minutes ago, Dr. Webb. I also adjusted the drip rate and noted it in the chart. If you'd like to review the timestamp, it's right there in the system." He stared at her back for a moment. "Are you correcting me?" "I'm answering your question." He walked away without another word. Sergeant First Class Dolores Kimura, the night charge nurse, caught the exchange from across the station. She waited until Webb disappeared into his office before she crossed the floor to Emily's side. "Don't let him get in your head," she said quietly. "He does that to everyone new." "He's not in my head," Emily said. "I know," Dolores said. "That's actually what worries him." The first call came in at 22:14. It was a priority medical transport. A SEAL commander named Lieutenant Colonel James Rourke, 44 years old, who had taken multiple fragments to the chest and abdomen during an extraction that had gone badly in the field. His team had gotten him stable enough to move, but just barely. The surgical team was notified 6 minutes before the helicopter touched down and the ER bay was prepped and moving before the rotor stopped spinning. Emily was pulled from the ward to assist because 2 of the surgical nurses were down with a stomach bug that had swept through the staff rotation. Webb didn't ask her. He simply issued the assignment without looking at her and moved on. She scrubbed in without comment. Rourke was in bad shape. She could see that the moment they wheeled him through. His face had the gray, sunken quality of a man whose body was spending everything it had just to keep the lights on. His pulse was thready, his pressure was dropping, and the field dressing over his left side was saturated through 3 layers. His team had done everything right in the field. She could read the work they'd done on him as clearly as reading a sentence, but the damage was deep and some of it was close to the structures that couldn't afford any more compromise. Webb took command of the room immediately, his voice rising to fill the space. He issued orders in rapid succession, efficient and precise, and for a moment Emily thought, all right, here is the version of him that earned the credentials on the wall. She moved to the instrument tray and began preparing the suture materials in the sequence she anticipated they'd need them. Not because anyone asked her to, because she could see the injury and she knew what order the repair would have to go in. The scrub tech beside her, a young man named Private Alvarado, glanced at her sideways. "You've done this before," he whispered. "Set up the cautery," she said. "He's going to need it before the second layer." Alvarado hesitated, then did it. 30 seconds later, Webb called for the cautery. Alvarado looked at Emily. Emily didn't respond because she was already 3 steps ahead, and the room didn't need commentary, it needed work. What none of them knew, what the personnel file with its rubber stamp and its 3 lines of civilian history did not say, was that Emily Foster had not spent those 3 years in a civilian hospital. She had spent 4 years before that embedded with a special operations surgical team in 2 combat theaters running trauma interventions in conditions that made this clean-lit, equipped operating room look like a 5-star medical center. She had been a combat medic before she was a nurse. She had been something else before she was a combat medic. But that part wasn't in any file that Marcus Webb had access to. The surgery on Rourke was proceeding. Webb was good, she'd give him that. He worked cleanly and fast, and he didn't lose his technical discipline even under pressure. Then the first explosion hit the outer fence. The sound was unmistakable to anyone who had heard it before. A low, heavy, concussive thud that came up through the floor before it reached the ears. The lights in the OR flickered. Someone down the hall shouted something indistinct. Alvarado's hands froze over the tray. Webb looked up. What was that? Nobody answered because nobody in that room had a good answer, and then the second explosion followed the first by approximately 4 seconds closer this time, and the emergency alert system activated with a tone that cut through every ambient sound in the building. "Continue the procedure," Webb said, his voice controlled but tight. "This room does not stop." Emily was already at the door. "Foster?" Webb's voice had an edge. "I said continue." She looked back at him. "The perimeter has been breached." That second explosion was inside the fence line. "How could you possibly—" The first was the outer barrier. The second was closer to the motor pool, which means they had already pre-positioned inside the wire before they detonated. "They're not trying to get in, Dr. Webb. They're already in." The silence in the room lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then the radio on the wall crackled, and the voice of the base security sergeant filled the space with words nobody in that room was prepared to hear. Armed personnel had entered the hospital complex. Evacuation was not possible. All non-essential staff were to shelter in place. All essential staff were to maintain patient care positions. And the security detail was the transmission cut out. Webb turned to face Emily. She was already gone from the doorway. The corridor outside the OR was controlled chaos staff moving fast in both directions, some toward the patient wards, some toward the storage rooms that doubled as shelter-in-place positions. Emily moved against the flow toward the west stairwell, where she could hear voices that didn't belong to hospital staff. She moved close to the wall, low and deliberate, the way a person moves when they have been trained to move and haven't forgotten any of it despite 5 years of trying. Corporal Dana Yee, one of the security MPs assigned to the hospital, was coming up the stairwell from below when she nearly collided with Emily in the landing. "Nurse, you need to go back," Yee set her hand up, her sidearm unholstered. "How many did you see?" Emily said. Yee stared at her. "What? On the ground floor. How many and where were they staged when you last had eyes on them?" "4, maybe 5. They came through the service entrance on the south side. I don't know where the rest of—" She stopped. "Rest? What rest? A 2-point breach on a facility this size with a target this high value is not a 4-man job," Emily said. "Where are the SEAL snipers that came in with Rourke's transport?" Yee's eyes went wide. "They staged on the roof, 15 of them. But the radio's been jammed since— I need to get to the roof." "You're a nurse, Bam." Emily looked at her for exactly 1 second. "Corporal, I need to get to the roof." Something in that look, something in the absolute flatness of it, the complete absence of fear, the quality of stillness that Marcus Webb had found so unsettling, made Dana Yee step aside without fully understanding why. The roof access was 3 floors up and through a door that required a keycard Emily didn't have. She asked Yee for it without breaking stride. Yee handed it over. The night air hit her as she pushed through the door, and she moved low and fast across the gravel surface toward the position where she could see the silhouettes of men already set up the SEAL snipers' rifles forward, scanning the grounds below. Their team leader, a Master Chief named Torres, spun toward her with his weapon raised before she had covered half the distance. "Stop right there. I'm hospital staff," she said, hands visible, moving at the same pace. "Your comms are jammed. I need to know what you're seeing." "Get back inside, ma'am." Master Chief Torres, she said his name without breaking stride, and the use of his name stopped him for half a second. There are at least 12 additional armed personnel in the building. The 4 on the ground floor are a distraction. The primary element is moving through the internal service corridors toward the OR, where Lieutenant Colonel Rourke is currently open on the table. Whatever they came here for, it's him. Torres stared at her. "How do you know my name?" "Because I read the transport manifest when your team came in, and because right now that is the least important question you can ask me. You've had 2 shooters break off from your coverage zone in the last 4 minutes, and you haven't been able to raise them on comms. I'm right." The pause that followed was the kind of pause that happens when someone says something so precisely accurate in a moment of uncertainty that the brain needs an extra beat to process it. Torres lowered his rifle 2 inches. "Who are you, Buyoy?" "Right now, and I'm the person telling you that your coverage has a gap on the east side and you have 3 minutes before they reach the surgical level. After that, you can ask whatever questions you want." Torres turned to his second, a young operator named Reyes, who was already scanning east with his scope. "Reyes." "She's right," Reyes said immediately. "I've got movement in the east corridor window. 3rd floor. At least 2. 4, Emily said. "The other 2 will be below them using the stairwell." Torres made a decision in under a second. "What do you need?" "A radio that isn't on the jammed frequency and one of your secondary rifles." The silence that followed that request stretched out long enough that 3 of the snipers had turned to look at her. "You're asking me to hand a weapon to a civilian nurse," Torres said. "I'm asking you to let me do my job," Emily said. Torres looked at her hands. Steady, completely abnormally steady. He had been doing this long enough to know that hands didn't lie the way faces did, and those hands had never once held a tremor. He held out the rifle. What happened in the next 11 minutes would be the subject of 3 separate after-action reports, 2 security investigations, and 1 very quiet conversation in a windowless room at a facility that had no public address. The first armed man came through the stairwell door on the surgical floor at exactly 22:41. He was moving fast and professionally, which told Emily everything she needed to know about his training. She was already positioned. The shot she took was not the shot of someone who had occasionally been to a range. It was the shot of someone who had been trained to take it in darkness, in wind, under conditions that no range could replicate from a distance that made the shot technically difficult and practically in her hands inevitable. The man went down. The second came through 30 seconds behind the first, and the result was the same. On the ground floor, Torres and his team had moved to intercept the internal element, and what followed was the kind of controlled, rapid, ruthlessly efficient work that SEAL teams existed to do. But the critical factor, the element that had protected Rourke while he lay open on the table, was the elimination of the advance team before it reached the surgical level. Webb didn't know any of this until it was over. He had maintained the surgery through the entirety of it, which was either extraordinary professional discipline or a symptom of a man so deeply committed to his own authority that he had refused to process what was happening around him. When the all-clear tone came through the wall radio at 23:17, he was closing the final layer of Rourke's repair. His hands had not shaken. He would tell people that later. He stepped out of the OR to find Torres standing in the corridor with 4 of his men, blood on 2 of their sleeves, and Emily Foster standing to one side, still holding a rifle she had not yet returned. Webb stopped. He looked at the rifle. He looked at Torres. He looked at Emily. What he said, in a voice that had lost all of its customary authority, exactly happened. Torres looked at Emily. There was something in his expression that Webb had never seen directed at a junior staff member before. It was the specific kind of respect that doesn't require a statement because it is too large and too solid to need words around it. "Ask her," Torres said. Webb turned to Emily. She set the rifle down carefully against the wall with the controlled precision of someone returning a tool to its proper place. She straightened, pulled the single strand of hair that had come loose from her clip back behind her ear, and looked at Marcus Webb with the same expression she had been giving him since day one, unhurried, unintimidated, and utterly unconcerned with what he was about to say. "The patient is stable," she asked. Webb blinked. "Yes." "The OR is clean?" Yes. "Then I need to go check on Ward 3, she said. "The patient in Base 7 was due for a medication cycle at 22:30, and we ran long." She walked past him. Torres watched her go. Then he turned back to Webb, who was standing in the corridor with the expression of a man who had just realized that every assumption he had built his professional opinion on had been from the first day entirely and catastrophically wrong. "Dr. Webb," Torres said, his voice carrying the particular flatness of someone who does not raise it because they have never needed to. "That woman just saved your patient's life. She saved 11 other lives in this building tonight, and she did it while your team was still getting organized." He paused. "Whatever you've been doing to her on this floor, I'd stop." He walked away. Webb stood alone in the corridor for a long time, looking at the rifle leaning against the wall and at the place where Emily Foster had disappeared around the corner toward Ward 3. He had been doing this for 22 years. He had worked with hundreds of nurses. He had prided himself on his ability to read people to know, in the first 20 minutes of working with someone, whether they had what it took. He had been wrong before. He had never been wrong like this. Down the hall behind the station desk in Ward 3, Emily Foster pulled up the medication chart for Base 7, noted the delay in the cycle, adjusted the timestamp with a brief factual notation about the security event, and began drawing the correct dosage with her steady, unremarkable, completely ordinary hands. Private Alvarado appeared at the ward entrance, breathless, like he'd run the full length of the building. He stood there staring at her. "Is it true," he said, "what they're saying that you... Did anyone check the IV lines in bays 1 through 4 while everything was happening?" she asked without looking up. He opened his mouth, closed it. I don't know." "Then let's check them," she said, capping the syringe, and walked toward the first bay as if the last 40 minutes had been nothing more than a long shift and a slightly complicated evening. "Come on, Alvarado. The patients don't care what just happened. They need their nurse." He followed her because there was nothing else to do, and because something about the way she walked, certain and quiet and entirely without performance, made the most natural thing in the world seem to be simply to follow where she led. The medication cycle in Base 7 was 19 minutes late, and Emily noted it in the chart without apology and without explanation because the chart didn't need her feelings about it. It needed the facts. She wrote the facts, capped the pen, and moved to Bay 2 where Mr. Calloway, a 58-year-old logistics contractor who had taken shrapnel to the left thigh during a convoy ambush, was awake and watching her with the particular alert expression of a man who had been conscious through the entire security event and was waiting for someone to tell him what had happened. "You doing okay?" she asked, checking his pulse at the wrist. "I heard gunshots," he said. "You did?" "Inside the building." "Yes." He studied her face. "You don't look like someone who just heard gunshots inside her building." "Your pulse is strong," she said. "Pressure's good. How's the pain on a scale of 1 to 10? Calloway was quiet for a moment. Then he said 4, maybe 3. He paused. "You're not going to tell me anything, are you?" "I'm going to tell you that you're stable, that the building is secure, and that you should try to sleep. And the rest of it," she looked at him, then really looked at him, the way she did sometimes when a patient needed more than data. "The rest of it is handled," she said. "You're safe." He held her gaze for a long moment, reading her the way men who'd spent time in difficult places learn to read faces, looking for the tell that said she was managing him rather than leveling with him. He didn't find one. "All right," he said, and settled back against the pillow. She was at the doorway when he spoke again. "Nurse," she turned. "Whatever you did tonight," he said. "Thank you." She didn't answer that. She walked back to the station, picked up the next chart, and kept moving. It was Torres who found her at 30 minutes past midnight, standing at the medication cart running her count for the shift handoff. He came alone without the rest of his team, which told her the conversation was going to be personal rather than operational. She didn't stop counting. "You need something, Master Chief?" "Rourke is out of surgery," he said. "Webb says he's going to make it." "I know. I checked in with the recovery room 20 minutes ago." Dale. Torres leaned against the wall with the careful ease of a man whose body had been through enough that it only moved when it chose to. "You want to tell me who you actually are?" I'm the night shift nurse on Ward 3. Emily. The use of her first name without rank or title landed differently than she expected. Not aggressive, not demanding, almost gentle. I've been in this work for 18 years. I have run operations on 4 continents. I know what someone looks like who has done this before, and I know what somebody looks like who is pretending to have done this before. You are the first of those 2 things, a long way past first. She finished her count, wrote the number, closed the cart. Is there something I can help you with tonight, Master Chief? You called my name on that roof, he said. You knew my name without being introduced to it. You read a transport manifest and memorized a name from a list in the middle of a security crisis. I have a good memory. You also knew our radio frequency was jammed before anyone had announced that on the internal system. You knew the structure of the attack before our team had finished assessing it. You placed the secondary element with accuracy that suggested familiarity with the tactical pattern. He paused. That's not nursing school. The ward was quiet around them. Somewhere in the distance, beyond the walls, she could hear the faint sound of the security team doing their post-incident sweep. The building that had that particular quality of late-night silence after violence-heavy provisional, like the quiet wasn't sure it was allowed to stay. Good night, Master Chief Torres, she said, and picked up the next chart. He didn't push. That surprised her. He simply nodded once with the expression of a man who understood that some doors opened on their own schedule and walked back down the corridor. What she didn't tell him, what she hadn't told anyone in 11 weeks at Balad, and hadn't told anyone in the 3 years before that was that her name had not always been Emily Foster. The name on her nursing license was real. The license was real. The 3 years of civilian hospital work before this posting were real. Everything else in the file was a version of real that had been constructed with considerable care by people whose job it was to construct such things. She had been 22 years old when she was recruited out of her combat medic rotation by a program that did not appear in any public military record. She had spent the following 6 years doing work that she had signed papers promising she would never describe to anyone who hadn't signed the same papers. She had been trained in combat medicine, tactical operations, close quarters, engagement surveillance, and the particular discipline of existing in plain sight as something less than she was. She had been exceptional at all of it. She had left because of one night, one decision, one moment that had gone the way it wasn't supposed to go, and she had carried it with her every day since, in the space between her shoulder blades, where the weight of it had made a permanent home. She didn't think about that tonight. Tonight, she thought about the medication count in the patient in Bay 7 and the stack of charts that needed to be completed before the day shift came in at 0600. She was halfway through the second chart when the door to the ward opened and Dr. Marcus Webb walked in. He was not in his surgical clothes anymore. He had changed into street clothes, a clean shirt, pressed slacks, and he was carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one on the station counter in front of her without a word. Then he stood there with both hands wrapped around his own cup, looking at the middle distance with an expression that Emily recognized as the specific face of a man who knew he needed to say something and had not yet worked out how to say it. She let him stand there. She kept writing. The coffee in this building, he said finally, has been terrible since approximately 1998, and I have been drinking it anyway for most of that time. She didn't respond. The Rourke procedure, he said, second layer repair on the hepatic. That was the right call, setting up the cautery before I called for it. He paused. I was going to call for it. I had already decided, but you'd anticipated it by approximately 40 seconds. She looked up. Is there a question in there, Dr. Webb? No, he said. No, there isn't. He looked down at his coffee. I owe you an apology. The silence that followed was not hostile. It was just long. I've been here 22 years, he said. I've seen a lot of staff come through this facility. I have a method for evaluating people quickly, and I have been right about people often enough that I stopped questioning the method. He stopped. I was wrong about you, badly wrong, and the way I expressed that wrongness was unprofessional, and it was unkind, and you deserve neither. Emily set her pen down. She looked at him fully for the first time that night, without the specific neutrality she wore like a second set of scrubs. She studied him the way she studied everything, not for what it performed, but for what it actually was. Marcus Webb, she had concluded in week 2, was not a cruel man. He was a frightened one. He had built his entire sense of competence and authority on being the most capable person in any clinical room he entered, and when something arrived that didn't fit that framework, he attacked it rather than examined it. She had seen it before. She had seen it in officers who led from the same place. It never ended well for them, and it rarely ended well for the people around them. But he was standing here at midnight with terrible coffee and a straight apology, and that took something. "Sit down, Dr. Webb," she said. He sat. "The apology is accepted," she said. "I don't hold things. It's a waste of energy I need for other things." She picked up her pen. "But I want to be clear about something. I don't need you to like me. I don't need your approval on my technique or my judgment. What I need is for you to treat me as a professional in front of the team, because when you undercut me in front of staff, it creates hesitation. And in this facility, hesitation costs patience." She met his eyes. "That's all I'm asking for." Webb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's a remarkably reasonable request from someone I've been treating unreasonably." "Yes," she said, "it is." Something shifted in him. Not dramatically, not the way things shifted in bad television, where the music swelled and the expression changed and the character was remade in a single moment. It was smaller than that, more real. Just a man deciding that the version of himself he'd been performing in this building for 2 decades was no longer the version he wanted to be, and sitting with that quietly in the terrible coffee dark of a ward that was still settling from the sound of gunshots. "Torres told me something," Webb said slowly. "He wouldn't tell me details. But he said that what you did tonight, the way you moved on that roof, the shots you took, that wasn't something a person does without serious training." Emily said nothing. "He also said that whatever your background is, it isn't his to share." Webb looked at her. "He seemed there was a specific quality of respect that I have never seen Torres direct at anyone on my staff before. At anyone, frankly, who wasn't one of his operators." She kept writing. "I'm not asking you to explain yourself," Webb said. "I don't have the right to that. I'm just telling you that whatever it is you carry with you into this building every night, it is not what I assumed it was." He stood. "And I'm sorry it took tonight for me to see that." He left the coffee on the counter and walked out. She stared at the cup for a moment. Then she picked it up, drank, and grimaced. Torres was right. It was terrible. The day shift change at 0600 brought with it the particular controlled chaos of a facility that had experienced a security incident overnight and had not yet fully processed it. The incoming staff were arriving to a different building than the one they'd left, even if the walls and the floors were the same. People moved differently after something like that. They talked in lower voices, kept closer to the walls, looked at the exits more than they usually did. It was the instinctive recalibration of a population that had been reminded without wanting to be that the walls were not as solid as they had assumed. Dolores Kimura did the handoff with Emily at the station, going through the overnight chart with her usual efficiency. She didn't say anything about what had happened until the last page, and then she put the clipboard down and looked at Emily the way a person looks at someone they are seeing clearly for the first time. "Torres put in a security report," Dolores said. "I've seen those reports before. Usually they're 3 pages and they cover what went wrong and how to prevent it." She paused. "This one is 7 pages and 2 of them are about you." "The report is his to write," Emily said. "Emily." Dolores' voice was quiet, not pushing, just present. "I've been a charge nurse in military facilities for 16 years. I've seen competent people and I've seen exceptional people, and I've seen a very small number of people who don't fit either of those categories because they're operating at a level that doesn't have a standard category." She folded her hands on the counter. "You saved lives last night, not just Rourke. 11 people are alive this morning who might not have been if you hadn't done what you did." Emily gathered the charts for her outgoing report. "I'm not asking you to explain it," Dolores said. "I just want you to know that I see it. Whatever it costs you to be here doing this, wearing the scrubs and clocking in and out and letting people like Webb talk down to you, I see the cost of it." The shift was changing around them. The day nurses were coming in. The building was filling with the sounds of morning handoff wheels on linoleum, voices exchanging information, the particular rhythm of a large institution resuming its normal functions after an interruption. Emily picked up her bag. She had 7 minutes before the shuttle to the staff housing block left from the east entrance. Get some rest, Dolores said. Emily nodded and walked. She was almost at the east exit when she rounded the corner near the recovery bay and nearly walked into Torres, who was standing outside Rourke's room with 3 of his operators and a man in civilian clothes who had the specific physical quality of someone who was military but not currently dressed like it. The civilian looked at Emily the moment she turned the corner, and the look was not the casual acknowledgement of a stranger. It was recognition. She stopped. The civilian was approximately 50 years old, medium height, gray at the temples, with the kind of face that had been exposed to weather and indecision for long enough that the two had become indistinguishable. He was looking at her with an expression that she hadn't seen directed at her in 5 years from anyone, and it landed in her chest the way specific memories land, not as thought but as physical sensation. He knew her, not Emily Foster, the other version, the one that wasn't in any file Marcus Webb had ever seen. Torres looked between them. Foster, he said, and there was something careful in his voice. This is Heartwarming. I know who he is, Emily said. The man in civilian clothes said, Hello 6. The number hit her like a key in a lock that had been sealed shut for 5 years. Torres and his operators were absolutely still. Whatever they had expected to happen when this man arrived at the facility that morning, it had not been this the quiet nurse from Ward 3 going chalk pale and very, very still, the way a person goes still when something from a past life walks directly into their present one without warning or permission. That name is retired, Emily said. Her voice was level, perfectly level. She had been trained to keep it level under conditions that made this look like a conversation in a park. I know, the man said. So is the program. Officially. He paused. That's why I need to talk to you. I'm off shift, she said. I know that too. Rourke's room was directly to her left. Through the small window in the door, she could see the shape of him in the bed-alive stable, the machinery around him doing its patient, unflashy work. She had helped save his life last night. She had saved 11 people in this building. She had told herself for 5 years that she was done with the other thing, that the nurse was not the cover story, that the nurse was what she actually was now. I don't go back, she said. I'm not asking you to go back, the man said. I'm asking you to listen. She stood in the corridor outside the recovery bay with the morning shift noise all around her and the bag over her shoulder and her entire quiet life balanced on what she said next, and the man from the past stood 3 feet away with his careful face and his careful voice and the number that had once been her name. You have 10 minutes, she said. Torres and his operators moved down the corridor without being asked. They understood in the way operators understood things when a conversation needed walls around it. The man gestured to the family consultation room across the hall. She followed him in. He sat down. She didn't. There were 12 attackers last night, he said. You took out 2. Torres and his team handled 6. The remaining 4 were apprehended by base security. He paused. All 4 are talking. Good for them. What they're saying, the man continued, is not good for anyone. He placed a folder on the table between them. It was thin 3 pages, maybe 4, and had no markings on the cover. Rourke was not the target. She looked at the folder. Rourke was the means, he said. The actual target was what's on the second page of that file. We've been tracking it for 14 months. Last night was not a random attack on a military hospital. It was an extraction operation. They were there to take something that arrived with Rourke's transport, something that Rourke had been carrying without knowing what it was. She picked up the folder. She read the second page. The silence that followed lasted long enough for 3 people to have walked past the closed door of the consultation room. If this is accurate, she said slowly, then whoever planned last night's operation has access to intelligence at a level that, yes, he said, that means there's a source in we. Yes. Inside this facility. We believe so. He let that settle. Last night wasn't the end, Emily. Last night was the opening move. She put the folder down. She looked at him. 5 years of building the quiet life, the scrubs, the charts, the terrible coffee, the pretending she was only one thing instead of 2, all of it was in the room with her, and on the other side of it was this. Who else knows about this file? She asked. Right now, you and me and one person in Washington who hasn't slept in 30 hours. She looked at the folder again, at the name on the second page. at the thing Rourke had carried without knowing he was carrying it and what it meant if it was still inside this building and who else might know it was here. "I need a secure line," she said. "I have one in the vehicle. And I need access to the overnight security footage from the service corridor on the south side, all of it. Not the version that goes to the base commander." He looked at her for a moment. "You already have a theory." "I have 3 questions," she said. "The footage will answer one of them. The other 2 I need to work out myself." She picked up her bag. She looked at the door. Outside that door was the morning shift, the charts, the shuttle to the housing block, the version of her life she had carefully constructed and maintained and chosen. She looked at the folder. "If I do this," she said, and her voice was quiet and certain and completely without hesitation, "I do it my way. No oversight on my methods. No committee sign-off on field decisions. No one second-guessing the call in real time." "Agreed. And when it's done, I come back here. To this ward. To this job." He held her gaze for a long moment. "Agreed." She opened the door. "Then let's go," she said. "We're already behind." The man's name was Caldwell. She had not spoken it aloud in 5 years, and even now, walking beside him toward the east exit of the building, she did not use it. Old habits. In the program, you learned quickly that names were currency, and you spent them carefully. He walked at the same pace she did, which told her he had been briefed on more than just last night. He knew how she moved. He had prepared for this conversation longer than she had. "The vehicle is a gray sedan," he said. "East lot, second row." "I know what your vehicles look like," she said. They walked out into the morning. The sky was the particular pale color of early desert dawn, flat and bright and indifferent to everything that had happened under it during the night. She could see 2 of Torres's operators at a distance not looking at her, which meant they were looking at her. Inside the sedan, Caldwell opened a hard case on the back seat and removed a satellite handset. He handed it to her without ceremony. "The line is clean. It rotates every 90 seconds. She held it but didn't dial. "Tell me the rest first." He settled back. 14 months ago, a source inside a foreign intelligence apparatus made contact with our station in Cyprus. He had documentation partial but credible, indicating that a network had been established specifically to acquire and liquidate a class of assets. Not data, not facilities. He paused. People. Specifically, a list of people whose identities had been compromised through a breach in a program that officially no longer exists. She kept her face still. "The breach happened approximately 5 years ago," Caldwell said. "At the time, we assessed the damage as contained. We were wrong." He looked at her. 18 months after the breach, 3 former assets from that program died in incidents that were assessed as unconnected. Car accident in Lisbon, drowning in the Gulf, fire in a residence in Portland. He stopped. "We didn't connect them until Cyprus." "How many names on the list?" she asked. "We recovered 9. We believe the full list is longer." "Am I on it?" He looked at her for exactly the length of time it takes a careful man to decide that a direct answer is the only answer available. "Yes." She absorbed that, not with drama, not with the particular sharp intake of breath that the information might have warranted from someone who had not spent years training for the moment when personal threat became operational data. She absorbed it the way she absorbed everything, took it in, placed it, and began working with it. "Rourke," she said, "what was he carrying?" Caldwell reached into the hard case and removed a small sealed evidence bag. Inside it was what appeared to be an ordinary medical data chip, the kind used to transfer patient records between facilities, standard issue, unremarkable. This was sewn into the lining of his field kit. He had no knowledge of it. It was placed there during a logistics stop 3 days before his injury. "Who placed it?" "That is question number 1, Caldwell said. She looked at the chip through the plastic. "What's on it?" "We don't know yet. Our technical team needs controlled conditions to access it without triggering whatever security layer is on it. But based on the nature of the attack last night, based on the fact that they sent 12 people and were willing to breach a military hospital to retrieve it, we assess that it contains either the full list or the identity of the source who gave us the partial list in Cyprus." "If it's the source," Emily said, "they're already dead." "Almost certainly. And if it's the full list? Then everyone on it needs to be warned and repositioned within a window that is—" He checked his watch. "Narrowing." She looked out through the windshield at the hospital building. At the east entrance, where she had walked out hundreds of times before with her bag over her shoulder and her mind already moving toward sleep. You said the source is inside this facility. We believe so. The attack last night was too precisely timed. Rourke's transport arrival was not publicly logged. The route, the timing, the specific entry point the attackers used, someone with knowledge of this facility's internal layout and communication protocols fed that information to the network within hours of Rourke's transport being scheduled. He paused. The scheduling decision was made by 6 people. 2 of them are in this facility right now. Names, he told her. She was quiet for a moment. One of the names she had expected the moment he described the access level required. The other one hit her differently. Not because it was surprising, because it was someone she had looked at every day for 11 weeks and read she had believed accurately. You're sure, she said. No, he said. That's why I need you. I can't move on a name inside a military medical facility without confirmation that will hold under the kind of scrutiny this is going to receive. I need evidence, and I need it in a way that doesn't spook whoever it is before we have everything. How long do I have? The technical team estimates they can access the chip in 6 hours. Whatever is on it once we know the window for the network to act closes. They'll know we have it. They'll either run or they'll move fast. He looked at her. 6 hours, Emily. She picked up the satellite handset. I need 3 things from you. Full access to the facility's internal communication logs for the last 72 hours. A reason to be back inside that building that doesn't look like what it is. And one of Torres's people on the inside without Torres knowing why. Why not Torres? Because Torres trusts me already, and trust is visible. I need someone who can be in position without drawing the attention that trust draws. She paused. Reyes, he's young enough that his presence in the building has a dozen plausible explanations and smart enough not to need a lot of instruction. Caldwell considered. Done. She dialed the handset and spoke for 45 seconds to the person in Washington who hadn't slept in 30 hours, confirming 2 pieces of information that she needed, confirmed before she went back into the building. The voice on the other end was clipped and precise, and extremely relieved to hear her, which she noted and set aside. She handed the handset back to Caldwell. I'll need a cover reason to pull the communication logs without routing the request through base administration. I can flag it as part of the post-incident security audit. That gives you 24 hours of access before anyone looks at the request twice. 6 hours is all I need. She opened the door. Keep the chip secure. Don't let it leave your person. Emily. His voice stopped her. She turned. He was looking at her with the expression she remembered from the program, the one he wore when he was about to say something that was both true and insufficient. I know what I'm asking you to step back into. No, she said. You know what you're asking me to step back toward. I'm not going back into it. I'm going to do this one thing, and then I'm going to come back to this building and finish my shift. She looked at him steadily. We're clear on that. We're clear, he said. She closed the door and walked. Torres was in the corridor outside the recovery bay when she came back in, and he fell into step beside her without being asked, which she had also expected. Reyes, she said without preamble. What about him, Somna? I need him on the ground floor near the administrative wing for the next 3 hours. If anyone asks, he's doing a welfare check on staff who were present during the incident. That's a legitimate post-incident protocol. Torres didn't ask why. He said, he'll be there in 10 minutes. Thank you. You want to tell me what Caldwell wanted? She glanced at him sideways. You know who he is? I know enough about who he is to know that when he shows up at a facility the morning after an incident, the incident is not over. He kept his voice low and even. And I know enough about you now to know that whatever he asked you, you already said yes. She didn't confirm or deny. My team is still on site until 1800, Torres said. If you need us. I know, she said. I'll tell you if I do. She went back to the ward. The first thing she did was relieve Alvarado from the station and send him to breakfast. He left gratefully with the overfull look of a young man who had been awake for far too long and was running on nothing but adrenaline and the story he was going to tell his friends. She watched him go and then sat down at the station terminal and opened the communication log access Caldwell had arranged. 72 hours of internal communications. She started at the beginning and moved fast the way she read everything, not word by word, but in the pattern recognition mode she had been trained into so thoroughly that it had become instinct. She was not looking for the message. She was looking for the shock of it, the timing, the frequency, the particular rhythm of someone communicating something they didn't want anyone to see in plain sight. She found the first anomaly at 38 minutes in. It was not in the content of any message. It was in the metadata, a series of internal routing pings that had passed through the facility's communication system at intervals that were too regular to be organic network traffic and too irregular to be automated protocol. Someone had been using the facility's internal communication infrastructure as a carrier for a secondary signal embedded below the visible layer, timed to coincide with the routine noise of shift changes and equipment checks. She noted the timestamps, pulled the corresponding staff access logs, cross-referenced them with the physical location data from the facility's internal ID scanner every time a staff badge was swiped through a door. The system logged it. She pulled 68 hours of swipe data and laid it against the communication timestamps. 3 of the 6 names Caldwell had given her showed clean. Their badge activity at the relevant times was inconsistent with proximity to the communication terminals that had carried the embedded signal. 2 of the remaining 3 were possibilities. One was near certain. And then she looked at the 4th timestamp, the one she had almost passed over because it was embedded inside a routine equipment check log from the medical supply corridor, and the badge that had been swiped at that terminal at that moment belonged to someone whose name was not on Caldwell's list of 6. She sat with that for a moment. Her hands were still. Her breathing was even. Her mind was moving very fast through the implications, because the person whose badge had swiped that terminal 41 hours before the attack at 3:17 in the morning, when they had no clinical reason to be in that corridor, was not an administrator, not a logistics officer, not anyone with formal access to transport scheduling. It was Marcus Webb. She closed the terminal. She sat at the nursing station with the charts in front of her and the sounds of the morning shift around her, and she went through what she knew about Marcus Webb, not the version of him she'd built from frustration and professional assessment, but the full version. 22 years at this facility. Career that had never moved upward the way a surgeon of his caliber should have moved. The particular sourness he carried that she had attributed to professional stagnation. The way he treated new staff, not randomly, she realized now, not from mere arrogance specifically. Specifically the newer staff. The ones who hadn't been here long enough to know what the normal pattern looked like. She thought about his apology the night before, the coffee, the specific things he'd said. She replayed it the way she replayed everything note by note, and she found the thing that had registered at the edge of her attention without being examined. He had known about Torres's report before Torres could have formally filed it. He had referenced it in conversation. She picked up the internal phone on the station desk. She dialed Caldwell's number and waited 2 rings. "Webb," she said when he picked up. "Look at Webb." A pause. "He wasn't on the list." "I know he wasn't on your list. Look at the supply corridor terminal. 41 hours before the incident. Badge swipe 3:17 a.m. She kept her voice at the professional cadence of a nurse relaying patient information. Anyone walking past the station would hear nothing unusual. And check his financial records going back 3 years. Not the surface ones, the deep ones. "Emily, I know what it is, do it." She hung up. She picked up the chart she'd been pretending to work on and began actually working on it because the patients still needed their nurse and the ward didn't stop because the world was complicated. Reyes appeared at the ward entrance at 8:47 in civilian clothes, looking like a large man trying to appear casual and achieving approximately 70% of that goal. Emily crossed to him without hurry. "Ground floor administrative wing," she said quietly, handing him a folded piece of paper. "There's a server room on the west end. Keycard access. I need you to be in the corridor outside it, not inside, not engaging, just observing. Anyone who goes in or out, you note the time and the face." Reyes looked at the paper. "This isn't a welfare check." "No," she said. "It isn't. Are you clear?" He folded the paper smaller and put it in his pocket. "Clear. If you see Webb," she described him, "you call Torres immediately. Don't approach. Don't engage. Don't let him see you make the call." Reyes looked at her with the expression of a young operator who was recalibrating rapidly. Is Dr. Webb? I don't know yet, she said. That's why you're watching and not acting. He nodded once and left. She went back to the ward. It was 40 minutes later at 9:22 that the second thing happened. She was at the medication cart when her peripheral vision caught movement in the corridor, the specific quality of movement that doesn't belong to the flow of a normal busy morning, too deliberate, too measured the way a person moves when they're going somewhere without wanting to look like they're going somewhere. Marcus Webb, walking toward the administrative wing, she finished drawing the medication, capped the syringe, placed it correctly. Then she walked to the ward phone and called Torres on his personal number rather than the facility line. Webb is moving toward admin, she said. Your man needs to be in position. He's already there, Torres said. What do you need me to do? Nothing yet. Stay available. She hung up. She administered the medication to the patient in Bay 3, checked the IV line, recorded the vitals, and answered 3 questions from the patient in Bay 1 who wanted to know when his attending would be by, and she did all of it with the complete focused attention that the patients in her care deserved because they hadn't chosen to be in the middle of this and they needed their nurse to be present. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She stepped to the hallway and read the message from Caldwell. 3 words and a timestamp. She read it twice. She put the phone back in her pocket and stood in the corridor for exactly 5 seconds with her eyes closed. Then she called Torres. I need you now, she said. Administrative wing server corridor. Bring 2 of your people. Don't announce it. Don't call it in on any facility frequency, and do not let Webb see you coming before you're in position. What did Caldwell find? Webb has had 3 wire transfers totaling $460,000 in the last 28 months, she said, routed through 2 intermediary accounts into a residential property in a name that isn't his. She paused. The property was purchased 11 months after the Cyprus contact was first established. Torres was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, she could hear him making the same calculation she had made running the math on what it meant arriving at the same destination. 5 minutes, he said. He's already in the admin wing, she said. You have 4. She was already moving. She took the stairwell rather than the corridor, the way she took everything when speed and discretion needed to coexist, and she came out on the ground floor 30 seconds ahead of Torres's timeline and positioned herself in the alcove outside the break room that gave a direct sight line to the server corridor entrance. Reyes was 10 feet further down, back against the wall, completely still. They looked at each other. She held up one finger and then pointed to the server room door. He nodded. Webb was inside. She waited. The door opened 2 minutes later. Webb came out with a small device in his right hand, not a facility-issued data drive. It was smaller, and it had the particular matte finish of equipment that was not commercially available. He was 3 steps into the corridor when he registered Reyes. He stopped. The thing about a person who is holding something they shouldn't be holding is that the guilt lives in the body before it reaches the face. The slight constriction in the chest that changes the angle of the shoulders. The micro shift of weight backward. Webb had been a surgeon for 22 years, and surgeons were trained to control the body's responses, but he had not been trained for this specific moment, and the response came through. His eyes went to the device in his hand. He moved to put it in his pocket. Dr. Webb. Emily's voice came from behind him. He turned. She was standing in the corridor with her arms at her sides and her expression perfectly, absolutely neutral, and there was nothing in her posture that was aggressive or threatening, but there was also nothing in it that offered him any way out. He looked at her for a long moment. Emily, he said. And in that single word, in the specific way he said her name, all the architecture of the morning before the coffee, the apology, the sitting across from her at the station and telling her he'd been wrong, rearranged itself into a different shape. The apology had been real. She was certain of that in the way she was certain of things she had been trained to read. But real apologies and genuine betrayal could exist in the same person, and often did, and the tragedy of that was not her job to process right now. Put the device on the floor, she said. Slide it toward me. He didn't move. Marcus, it was the first time she'd used his first name, not as warmth, as exactness. Put it down. Torres came around the corner behind Emily with 2 operators, and the corridor became a very different place in the space of a single breath. Webb looked at Torres, at the operators, back at Emily, and the specific quality of what happened in his face then was not calculation. Calculation had been the last 4 minutes. What happened now was something older and more human. It was the face of a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and who had somewhere in the night just past made an apology he meant, and who was now standing in the consequences of everything that had come before it. He bent down. He placed the device on the floor. He slid it toward her. She stopped it with her foot. She looked at him for a moment. She thought of the terrible coffee and the thing he'd said about being wrong, and she set all of it aside because the ward needed her and the patients needed their nurse, and she had 6 hours before the chip was accessed, and the full list was known, and there was still work to do. "Torres," she said. "I've got him," Torres said. She picked up the device. She looked at Webb one last time. "I'm sorry it went this way," she said, and she meant it. That was the thing about being honest. You could mean it even when it didn't change anything. She turned and walked back toward the stairwell with the device in her hand and the morning still only half over and everything that came next waiting for her at the top of the stairs. The stairwell door closed behind her and she stood on the landing for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to let the specific weight of what had just happened settle into its proper place inside her. Not grief, she didn't have room for grief right now, but acknowledgement. Webb had been in that building for 22 years. He had saved lives in that building. And somewhere in those 22 years, something had bent him in a direction that ended in a corridor with a device he shouldn't have been holding. And whatever had bent him that way was above her pay grade to understand or forgive. Her job was the next step. Only ever the next step. She came out on the 3rd floor and went directly to the small supply room at the end of the north corridor that she had identified in her first week as the one room in the building with no camera coverage and a door that locked from the inside. Old habit, she mapped every building she worked in. She had stopped asking herself why she still did it years ago. She locked the door. She looked at the device Webb had been carrying. It was a short-range data transmitter. The kind that didn't send through any network that a standard security sweep would catch because it didn't use any standard network. It used the facility's own internal maintenance frequency, the low bandwidth channel that ran the automated temperature and pressure monitors in the storage units. Nobody swept that frequency for unauthorized traffic because nobody thought to. Webb had been extraordinarily careful. He had been doing this for close to 3 years. The care he had brought to it was the same care he brought to surgery, and she recognized it as such and found it both impressive and devastating in equal measure. She photographed the device with the small secondary phone Caldwell had left in the vehicle, then called him. "I have the transmitter," she said. She heard him exhale. "Is it intact?" "Intact and unactivated. He hadn't sent yet." She paused. "He was going to transmit the chip's location. He knew where you were keeping it." "That's not possible. Only 3 people." "Caldwell." Her voice was even. "How long was Webb briefed into the post-incident assessment?" Silence, then a sound she recognized as a man applying the heel of his hand to his own forehead. "The base commander's security briefing at 0500. Webb was present as chief of surgery. He would have been told about the chip as part of the medical assets inventory." That's how he knew. He didn't need a source inside your operation. He needed one briefing and 1 hour alone with that transmitter. She set the device down carefully. He was planning to tell them where you had it and let them come back for it. A second operation cleaner than the first, with the facility already assessed and the staff disrupted from last night. When would he have transmitted? If I had to guess, within the next 2 hours, for the chip access window closed, before they lost their chance. She looked at the device. He was cutting it close, which means either he didn't have an earlier opportunity or he was still deciding. "Still deciding," Caldwell said. Yes, she had thought the same thing. The apology at midnight, the coffee, the specific quality of a man who had made a decision a long time ago and was now at the end of it, not fully certain it had been the right one. She wondered what had tipped him toward the transmitter anyway after all of that. She suspected she'd never know, and she set the wondering down the same way she set everything down that she couldn't use. "The chip," she said. "Where are we on access? Technical team is in position. 4 hours, maybe less. We moved the timeline up when you called about Webb." A pause. "Emily, the 4 attackers we apprehended last night. They gave us a name this morning." She waited. They gave us the name of the person who recruited them, who organized the network, who's been running this operation for the last 14 months. Another pause. You know the name? She recognized the specific care in his voice, the way he was spacing his words, giving her room to absorb it before it hit. That was not Caldwell's usual mode, Sean. Caldwell was efficient, and he was precise, and he was not gentle, which meant the name required gentleness. Tell me, she said. He told her. She sat down on the floor of the supply room. Her back found the wall, and she sat with her knees bent and the phone against her ear, and she looked at a spot on the opposite wall, and she breathed. In, out, in, even. She had been trained to receive catastrophic information in conditions where she couldn't afford to react to it. This was not those conditions. There was a locked door between her and anyone who might see her face. But the training was the training, and it held. The name Caldwell had given her was Colonel Daniel Marsh. She had served under Daniel Marsh for 2 of the 6 years she'd spent in the program. He had been her commanding officer in the 2nd Theater. He had been the person who signed her exit paperwork when she left. He had been in the particular language of people who spend years doing dangerous work in close proximity to one another, someone she had trusted completely. He had also been evidently compromised at some point in the last 5 years. Turned recruited or broken, she didn't know which yet, and in operational terms, it didn't matter which. What mattered was that Daniel Marsh knew her real name. He knew her training profile. He knew her tactical patterns. He knew exactly how to find Emily Foster if he went looking. He's on the list, she said. It wasn't a question. No, Caldwell said. He's not on the list. He's the one who sold the list. She absorbed that. He was our source in Cyprus, Caldwell said. Or he was running the source in Cyprus. We're not certain yet whether the Cyprus contact was genuine and Marsh found out about it, or whether Marsh ran the Cyprus contact deliberately as a deception. If the latter, then the partial list Cyprus gave you was curated, she said, designed to make you think you had partial intelligence, while the actual operation continued undetected. Yes, and the 9 names on the partial list are almost certainly not the names he actually sold. She thought about that. 14 months of an investigation built on a foundation that Marsh may have constructed specifically to mislead it. How long has he been operational? We don't know. The earliest financial anomaly we found is 7 years ago. 7 years. 2 years before she left the program. 1 year before the incident that had ended her operational career and sent her into the carefully constructed life of Emily Foster, civilian nurse. She thought about that timing and what it might mean, and then she thought about the incident itself, the one she carried between her shoulder blades, and a very specific and very cold understanding began to take shape. Caldwell, she said carefully, the operation in the Coast Valley, 5 years ago, February, silence. The intelligence that put us in that position, she said, the source that turned out to be compromised, the 3 people we lost. More silence. Was that Marsh? She said. The silence that followed was not Caldwell deciding whether to answer. It was Caldwell deciding how to answer. She knew the difference. We believe so, he said. Yes. She closed her eyes for a moment. 5 years. She had carried the weight of that night for 5 years, in the space between her shoulder blades where it had made its permanent home, and she had understood it as one of the terrible random failures that the work produced, intelligence compromised by chance, in an operation broken by bad luck, 3 people dead because the world was imprecise and unforgiving. She had left the program partly because of the weight of it, had built the quiet life partly in response to it, and it had not been chance. It had not been bad luck. She breathed through that. In, out, even. Where is he? She said. That's the problem, Caldwell said. He went dark 48 hours ago. His last known location was Frankfurt. Since then, nothing. He's coming here, she said. Emily. Caldwell. He knows the operation failed last night. He knows the chip wasn't retrieved. He knows Webb was his inside access, and Webb is now in custody, whether or not he knows that specifically yet. A man who has been running a network at this level for 7 years does not simply step back when an operation fails. He adjusts. He comes at the problem from a different angle. She got to her feet. And he knows exactly who I am and what I'm capable, which means he also knows that I'm the variable he didn't account for. If he's coming here, it's because he wants to retrieve the chip, eliminate the variable, and close the operation in a single move. That's a significant exposure for someone who's been careful for 7 years. He's not being careful anymore. He's being fast. There's a difference. She unlocked the supply room door. How many people do you have on site? Myself and 2 in the vehicle. Torres and his remaining team. Get Torres, tell him everything. All of it. I don't care about compartmentalization at this point. The window for that is closed. She moved into the corridor, keeping her pace even and her face empty. And I need you inside the building, not the vehicle, inside and on the floor where the chip is being accessed. I can be there in 4 minutes. 3, she said and hung up. Torres picked up on the first ring. Tell me, he said. She told him, all of it. Marsh, the program, Cypress Coast, the 7 years. She gave it to him in the compressed, sequential shorthand of an operational briefing, because Torres was a man who could receive information at that speed, and she didn't have time for anything slower. She heard him go very still as she spoke, and she knew the quality of that stillness. It was not shock. Torres had been in this work long enough that shock was a luxury he no longer carried. It was the stillness of a man receiving a threat assessment and immediately beginning to work with it. Marsh is former special operations, Torres said when she finished. If he's moving on this facility, he'll have a team. Small, she said. Fast. He won't move with the number he moved last night because last night failed and he knows what's here now. He'll move with 4 people, maybe 6. Enough to do the job and not enough to draw the profile that 12 drew. Insertion point. He knows this facility. He'll know that the obvious approaches are covered after last night. He'll use something that isn't obvious, she thought. Medical supply chain, emergency vehicle access, something that has a reason to be here that isn't security dependent. She paused. The ambulance bay. Torres didn't hesitate. I'll put Reyes and 2 others there. Plainclothes, non-tactical. And I need 2 of your people with Caldwell on the floor where the chip is. If Marsh gets that far, he won't, Torres said. It wasn't bravado. It was the flat statement of a man who had assessed the situation and arrived at a conclusion. We'll have 4 layers between him and that chip. What do you need to be? She thought about that. Where did she need to be? The instinct said the chip be where the thing that mattered most was protect the objective. The training said something different. The training said that in a situation where the threat is personalized, where the person coming at you knows your capabilities and your patterns, your greatest asset is that you also know theirs. She knew Daniel Marsh. She had served under him for 2 years. She knew how he moved, how he thought, how he made decisions under pressure. She knew that when he was forced to improvise, he defaulted to the approach that gave him the most direct line between himself and the objective. He was brilliant, and he was experienced, and he was in this moment operating in a narrow window with a high emotional stake. That combination produced predictable errors in even the best operators. I need to be where he expects me not to be, she said, and I need you to make sure he knows I'm somewhere else. Torres understood immediately. The CHIS access floor. Put it on the facility radio, unencrypted, just casual enough to be real. Mention my name in the context of the chip access. Give him a location to walk toward. And where will you actually be? The ambulance bay, she said. When he comes in, I'll be behind him. There was a pause. That's a significant personal risk, Emily. He had 3 of my people killed in Coast, she said. He bent a surgeon at this facility into doing something that man is going to have to live with for the rest of his life. He put 11 people in this building in mortal danger last night. Her voice was even and quiet and entirely certain. I'll manage the risk. Torres let out a slow breath. 40 minutes to reposition. Can you hold the ambulance bay approach for that long? I don't need 40 minutes, she said. I need you in position before he moves, which means you need to move now. Moving, he said, and the line went quiet. She walked to the ward, checked the bay assignments, confirmed that the day shift was fully briefed on the overnight patients, and spent 7 minutes completing chart documentation for the 3 patients whose records she hadn't finished. She did it with complete concentration because the patients were real and their records mattered, and the fact that she was simultaneously mapping the facility's ground floor approach vectors in the back of her mind did not change either of those things. Alvarado reappeared at the ward entrance looking rested and slightly guilty about it. I heard about Dr. Webb, he said. Is it true that You're on Bay 1 through 3 this morning, she said. Bay 4 needs a dressing change at 11. The patient in Bay 2 is going to ask you 3 times if he can have real coffee, and the answer is no, and you don't need to explain why more than once. Alvarado stared at her. Are you leaving? I'll be back, she said. You're capable. Act like it. She left him standing at the station and went downstairs. Caldwell was in the building by the time she reached the ground floor. She saw him at the end of the main corridor moving toward the elevator with 2 men she recognized as agency personnel in the specific way that agency personnel were always recognizable, a quality of deliberate unremarkability that achieved the opposite of its intention. She caught his eye and gave him the single nod that meant in position, proceed as planned. He returned it. The ambulance bay was accessed through a set of double doors at the south end of the ground floor. It sat adjacent to the emergency intake, which meant there was always a reason for the doors to move and always ambient noise to mask the sound of movement. Marsh would know that. He would use it. She was in position 12 minutes before Torres confirmed his team was set. She stood in the supply alcove adjacent to the bay doors, which gave her a direct sightline to the exterior approach while keeping her out of any sightline from outside. She had no weapon. She had considered asking Torres for one and decided against it because the specific scenario she was running one person alone, intercepting a trained special operations officer at close quarters, was not a scenario where a firearm was her best asset. Her best asset was that Marsh was coming to find Emily Foster, the quiet nurse, and what was standing in that alcove was something else entirely. She waited. She breathed. She let her mind go to the clean, still place it went when the work required everything and permitted nothing extraneous. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Then she heard the exterior door handle move. They came in fast and professional, 2 men first checking the entry, and then Marsh himself, and then 1 more behind him. 4 total. She had been right about the number. She noted that without satisfaction. Marsh looked exactly as she remembered him. 61 years old, 6 feet even, the specific physical economy of a man who had never stopped training. He moved the way he had always moved, quiet and deliberate, and with the precise spatial awareness of someone who was mapping every room in real time. He made it 8 feet into the bay before he registered that something was wrong. It wasn't her he saw. She hadn't moved. It was the absence, the particular quality of a space that should have had the ambient human noise of a working medical facility and instead had a silence that was 1 degree too complete. He registered it in the way that people with that kind of training registered anomalies, a slight adjustment of weight, a fractional increase in stillness. And then she stepped out of the alcove. Daniel, she said. He turned. And in the half second between his turning and his response, she saw the full recognition, and behind it something she had not expected. Not calculation, not the tactical readiness of an operator in a compromised position. Something older than that. Something almost like relief. 6, he said. That name is retired, she said. You know what else is retired? Your window. The chip is being accessed right now. Webb is in custody. Your 4 people from last night are talking. She held his gaze. It's over, Daniel. The 2 men who had entered ahead of him looked at each other, not at Marsh. That told her what she needed to know about the quality of their loyalty to him. You don't know what you're in the middle of, Marsh said. His voice was the same measured, authoritative, the voice she had followed into the worst situations of her professional life and trusted completely. She let herself hear it clearly without the trust. I know exactly what I'm in the middle of, she said. I've been in the middle of it since last night. What I don't know yet is why. And I'm asking you before Torres comes through that door in approximately 45 seconds to tell me why. Something moved in his face. He's outside, she said. He's given you 45 seconds because I asked him to, because I spent 2 years working under you and I want to understand what happened. She kept her voice level and direct without heat. Not for me, for the 3 people we lost in Coast. But the name landed. She watched it land. She watched the specific thing that happened in a person's face when they are confronted with the weight of a specific consequence, of a specific decision, and what she saw in Marsh's face was not the absence of that weight. He had been carrying it. For 5 years he had been carrying it, and it had not gotten lighter. Coast was a mistake, he said. The timing, it wasn't supposed to. He stopped. He pressed his lips together. It wasn't supposed to go the way it went. 3 people are dead because of the way it went. I know that. Do you... The 45 seconds were up. The bay doors behind Marsh opened, and Torres came through with Reyes and 2 operators smooth and fast, and without any of the noise that 12 people had made the night before. Marsh's 2 forward men looked at the operators, looked at each other, and made the correct assessment of their situation. They put their hands up without being told. Marsh didn't move. He was still looking at Emily. Why, she said again. 1 word. Just that. He looked at her for a long moment with the face of a man who had made a choice 7 years ago that had seemed logical or necessary or survivable at the time, and who had spent every year since managing the consequences of it, and who was standing at the end of it in an ambulance bay being looked at by someone he had once trusted as much as anyone he had ever trusted, and who was asking him the one question he didn't have a clean answer to. My son, he said. They had my son. She absorbed that. The specific weight of it, not an excuse, not a justification, just a fact, the kind of fact that explained everything and resolved nothing. Torres stepped forward. Colonel Marsh, hands where I can see them, please. Marsh put his hands up. He kept his eyes on Emily. I tried to minimize it, he said, and after the first year, I tried to steer what I gave them toward things that wouldn't. He stopped. It didn't work that way. It never does, she said. Torres cuffed him, efficient and impersonal, the way Torres did everything. Reyes moved on the other 2. It was over in under a minute the way things ended when they were properly prepared for. Emily stood in the ambulance bay with the sound of the cuffs and the operator's terse communications around her, and she looked at Daniel Marsh being walked toward the exterior, and she let herself feel the full weight of it for exactly 5 seconds. The 2 years of trust, the 6 years of the program, the 3 names from Coast, that she still said privately sometimes when she needed to say something true, and then she set it down. Caldwell appeared at the bay door. He looked at Marsh, then at Emily. He crossed the space between them and stopped in front of her. The chip, he said. Technical team cracked it 40 minutes ago. She looked at him. And it's the full list. 47 names, he paused. We have them all. And we have enough on Marsh's network to shut it down completely. Accounts contacts the intermediaries going back 4 years. He held her gaze. It's done, Emily. She nodded. All 47 people on that list are going to be alive next week because of what you did in the last 14 hours. She looked at the bay door. Through it, she could see the pale morning sky, the same flat, indifferent desert dawn that had been there when she walked out with Caldwell hours ago. Same sky, different world. I need to get back to the ward, she said. Caldwell looked at her for a moment. Just like that. Bay 4 has a dressing change at 11, she said. Alvarado can do it, but he'll use too much gauze, and I'll have to restock the cart. She walked past him toward the stairs, and the sound of her footsteps on the linoleum was the same sound they always were. Even unhurried, the sound of someone who knew exactly where she was going and had no need to run to get there. Alvarado had used too much gauze. She saw it the moment she walked into Bay 4, the dressing on the patient's forearm wrapped 3 times thicker than necessary, the tape applied with the particular overcaution of someone who was compensating for uncertainty with material. She restocked the cart without comment, noted the correction in the chart, and moved to Bay 2, where the patient had indeed asked 3 times about real coffee, and Alvarado had, to his credit, held the line on all 3. You came back, Alvarado said from the station, watching her with the expression he'd been wearing since the night before, the one that was trying to reconcile the nurse he thought he knew with everything the last 14 hours had produced. I said I would, she said. Dr. Webb is, he stopped, started again. They're saying he was arrested, that he was passing information. I know. Did you know before this morning? She looked at him. He was 23 years old. She knew fresh out of his medical training rotation assigned to this facility because of a staffing shortage in the particular randomness of military placement. He had good hands and a tendency to overthink under pressure in a genuine care for patients that he hadn't yet learned to protect with the professional distance that would either save him or hollow him out depending on how he used it. She had been watching him since week 1, the way she watched everything, noting, assessing, building a complete picture from the available data. I didn't know before this morning, she said. I found out this morning. How did you? He paused. Then, with the look of someone choosing not to ask the question he most wants answered, never mind. Good choice, she said and went back to the charts. The ward moved through the mid-morning with the particular rhythm of a place that had survived something and was in the process of absorbing it. The staff spoke in lower voices than usual. People made eye contact in the corridors with more intention than was normal, the specific human behavior of people checking to confirm that the people around them were still real and still present. The patients picked up on it the way patients always picked up on the emotional climate of a ward. And there were more call button unactivations in the 2 hours after shift change than there typically were, which was not about physical need. It was about wanting a person to come through the door. Emily answered every call. She was charting at the station at 11:40 when Dolores Kimura came back in 4 hours before her shift was due to start. She was in civilian clothes and she had clearly come directly from home because her hair wasn't in its usual tight configuration, and she was carrying a coffee from the vendor cart outside the main gate. She sat down next to Emily at the station without preamble. "Torres called me," she said. Emily kept writing. "He told me about Marsh, about the list." Dolores set her coffee down. "About Coast." Emily finished the line she was writing. Capped the pen. Set it parallel to the chart the way she always did. "I've known something was different about you since week 2, Dolores said. "I didn't know what. I told myself it was just that you were unusually competent for someone new, but it was more than that." She paused. "You were contained in a way that isn't natural." That's the word I kept coming back to, contained, like someone who had learned a long time ago that the world was the kind of place that required everything to be held very tightly. Emily looked at the middle distance for a moment. "Was there a point to this, Dolores, or are you just here to profile me?" Dolores almost smiled. "The point is that 47 people are alive and going to stay alive because of what you did. And you're sitting here charting gauze usage. The gauze usage needs to be charted." Emily. She turned and looked at Dolores fully. Dolores had the face of someone who had been in difficult places for a long time and had chosen deliberately every single day to remain open rather than closed. It was a quality Emily had noticed in week 2 and had not known quite what to do with, because it was not a quality she encountered frequently, and it was not a quality she entirely trusted, having been trained in environments where openness was a liability. But 11 weeks of watching Dolores Kimura move through this ward had produced a body of evidence that was difficult to argue with. She was exactly what she appeared to be. Emily had eventually concluded that this was in fact possible. "I'm fine," Emily said. "I know you are," Dolores said. "That's not what I'm asking about." She paused. "How are you not fine? Underneath the fine?" It was quiet in the ward for a moment. From Bay 3 came the sound of a patient shifting in his bed, the creak of the frame and the rustle of the pillow. From somewhere in the building, far away, the sound of a door. "I found out this morning that the operation 5 years ago that ended my career, the one where I lost 3 people, was not an accident," Emily said. "It was Marsh. He compromised the intelligence. We walked into it because he needed to give them something significant enough to prove his value, and we were it." She looked at the pen on the chart. "I've spent 5 years carrying the weight of that night as something that happened to us. Turns out it was something that was done to us." She paused. "I'm still working out what to do with the difference." Dolores was quiet for a moment. "That's a significant thing to find out in the middle of 14 other things." "Yes." "Did you get to be angry about it?" "Not yet." When Emily picked up the pen. "When I'm off shift." Dolores looked at her for a long moment. Then she reached out and put her hand briefly on Emily's forearm. Not a grab, not a hold, just a contact. The specific weight of a person who had decided that you were worth the gesture. "Okay," Dolores said. She picked up her coffee. "I'm going to go check on the recovery bay, and then I'm going to violate 3 HR protocols by bringing Rourke a decent cup of something, because that man came in last night with his chest open, and he's going to have a bad enough recovery without the facility coffee making it worse." She stood. She had taken 3 steps when Emily said, "Dolores." She turned. "Thank you," Emily said. Dolores nodded once in the way of someone who doesn't need the thanks to know the weight of what it means, and walked down the corridor. It was just past noon when Torres appeared at the ward entrance. He was in civilian clothes, and now his team's operational window had closed. The formal threat was contained, and he had the look of a man who was transitioning between modes but hadn't fully landed in the new one yet. He stood at the entrance until Emily glanced up and she crossed to him. Marsh is in federal custody, he said. Caldwell's people took him 40 minutes ago. The network team has already moved on the financial infrastructure by end of day. Every account, every intermediary, every line of the operation gets frozen or burned. He paused. It's clean, Emily. It's actually clean. She nodded. The 47 people on the list. Notifications went out through secure channels starting an hour ago. Some of them have been living their cover lives for years without knowing they were exposed. Some of them have kids now. Normal jobs, the whole thing. He looked at her. They're going to get phone calls today that tell them the threat is gone, that they're safe. He stopped. Some of those calls are going to be the best thing those people have heard in years. She thought about that. 47 people going about whatever version of ordinary life they had constructed, and somewhere in their day today a phone ringing and a voice on the other end telling them the thing they maybe hadn't allowed themselves to fully believe they would ever hear. She thought about what that would feel like. She let herself think about it for a full 3 seconds, which was more than she usually allowed. Webb's going to talk to a federal investigator this afternoon, Torres continued. Caldwell said he's already indicated he'll cooperate fully. I think he wants to explain the thing more than he wants a reduced sentence. He paused. For whatever that's worth. It's worth something, she said. I don't know exactly what yet. Torres looked at her. He had the direct, uncomplicated gaze of a man who had spent 18 years making rapid, accurate assessments of people in situations, and what he did with that gaze sometimes was simply look at a person as though looking at them was itself the thing he needed to do. I put something in the security report, he said, in the section that goes directly to the Joint Special Operations Command and does not pass through base administration. I put in what you did last night on that roof, and I put in what you did this morning, and I put in as much as I understand it what you are. He paused. I didn't use your real name. I don't know your real name. I used the name you gave me, and I noted in the report that the individual in question had operated at a level consistent with advanced special operations training and had demonstrated tactical judgment and execution that directly preserved both the asset and the lives of 11 facility personnel. Emily was quiet. I did that, Torres said, because in 18 years what I saw last night and this morning is in the top 3 things I have ever seen anyone do in a critical situation. And the record should say that. He met her eyes. You can dispute it if you want. I'll note your objection. I won't dispute it, she said. Something in him settled. Good. He started to turn and she said, Torres. He looked back. Reyes, she said. He's going to buy an exceptional operator. He's already most of the way there. The thing he's still working on is the speed of his trust assessment. He defers to rank 1 beat too long when rank is giving him bad information. He'll work it out, but someone should tell him it's the thing to work on. Torres stared at her. You assessed my operator. I assess everyone, she said. You can tell him or not. Torres made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite an exhale, but was somewhere between the two and held a genuine quality. I'll tell him, he said and walked. The afternoon brought 2 new admissions from a vehicle incident on the base perimeter and wrote minor injuries, no surgical intervention required, in the routine continuation of the ward's existing patient load. Emily worked through it the same way she worked through everything, with the complete and undivided attention that each patient deserved and that she gave without effort, because the attention was not something she performed. It was simply what she was when she was here. At 3:17, precisely 12 hours after she had identified Webb's badge swipe in the supply corridor log, she was redressing the wound on the patient in Bay 1 when she heard footsteps in the corridor outside that moved differently from the way the facility staff moved. She recognized the specific cadence before she looked up, the deliberate, slightly too measured step of someone navigating an unfamiliar environment with professional care. She finished the dressing, applied the tape, checked the edges. Then she walked to the bay door. The man in the corridor was approximately 40 years old in civilian clothes with a lanyard that identified him as a visitor from the Office of the Inspector General. He was looking at a clipboard and moving toward the nursing station with the expression of someone who had been sent to do something they had been briefed on imperfectly. He saw her and stopped. Nurse Foster. Yes. He looked at his clipboard, then at her, then back at the clipboard in the manner of someone whose briefing had told them one thing and whose eyes were telling them something that didn't fully match it. I've been asked to request your presence for a preliminary debrief regarding the events of last night and this morning. He paused. At your earliest convenience. My shift ends at 1800, she said. The request is for... He checked the clipboard. But now actually, if possible, she looked at him. He was nervous. Not afraid, just the particular nervousness of a man who had been given a task and had not been given sufficient context to perform it with confidence. She recognized it as the nervousness of someone adjacent to something significant that they couldn't fully see. Is Caldwell in the building? She said. The man blinked. I'm not at liberty to yes or no. He looked at his clipboard one more time in the way people look at objects when they need a moment that the situation isn't naturally offering. Yes, he said. Tell him I'll come at 1800, she said, after my shift. He indicated the matter was... I know what he indicated, she said. My patients don't. She went back into Bay 1 to check that the tape was holding the way she wanted it to. The man stood in the corridor for a moment. Then he walked back the way he'd come. Alvarado, who had witnessed the exchange from the station, watched the man go, and then looked at Emily with the expression he had been wearing with variations for the last 15 hours, the one that was perpetually on the verge of asking a question it hadn't yet decided to ask. What? She said. Nothing, he said. How do you do that? Do what? Say no to people like that. He gestured in the direction the man had gone. In a way that they just accept. They just accept it. She looked at him. You say what you mean, she said, clearly and directly without apology and without cruelty, and then you proceed on the basis that you mean it. She picked up the next chart. That's all it is. He thought about that. That sounds simple. Most true things do, she said. At 1700, she was completing her final chart of the shift when the recovery bay called the station with an update on her work. He had regained full consciousness. His vitals were stable. He was, according to the recovery nurse, asking questions at a rate that suggested his brain had sustained no damage whatsoever and was operating at what she described as, quote, an exhausting level of function. Emily smiled at that. It was a small smile, brief and private, and Alvarado caught it from across the station with the expression of someone seeing something rare. What? She said. Nothing, he said. I've just never seen you do that before. Do what? Smile like that, like something was actually funny. She looked back at the chart. Work's going to be fine, she said. Yeah, Alvarado said. I figured that out from the smile. At 1750, she completed her handoff notes and gave the incoming night shift nurse a full verbal rundown on every patient on the ward, conditions, medications, behavioral notes, the specific personal detail for each patient that made the difference between care that was technically correct and care that was actually received. She did this every handoff. She had done it every shift for 11 weeks. The incoming nurse, a capable and competent woman named Sergeant Priya Okafor, listened with the focused attention of someone who had learned over the 3 weeks she had overlapped with Emily that the details in the handoff were worth writing down. Bay 2, Emily said. He's going to ask about coffee 4 times tonight instead of 3. He had a difficult afternoon and he's processing it by being difficult. Don't take it personally and don't give him the coffee. But if you have 5 minutes at some point, just sit in the room with him for a bit. He's scared and he's managing it badly. The company will help more than the coffee. Okafor wrote it down. Bay 3. Sleeping better tonight. The pain management adjustment is working. Don't disturb him for the midnight vitals unless there's clinical cause. He's been sleep deprived for 4 days, and the rest is doing more for him right now than the data point. Noted. She finished the handoff at 1812 minutes. She was 12 minutes late to Caldwell's debrief, and she felt no particular way about that. The conference room on the 2nd floor held Caldwell, the IG man with the clipboard, 2 other people she didn't know, but read immediately as legal and intelligence oversight respectively, and she registered this with a precise calibration of surprise, a 2-star general named Hargrove, whom she knew by reputation as the Joint Special Operations Command's Deputy Director of Operations. Hargrove was 60 years old with the compact, deliberate physicality of someone who had never allowed rank to become a reason to stop being an operator. He was sitting at the head of the table, And he looked at Emily when she came through the door with the particular quality of attention that very senior people reserve for things they had been briefed extensively about and were now seeing in person for the first time. She sat down. "Nurse Foster," Hargrove said. "General Hargrove," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "You know who I am." "I read the transport manifest," she said. Something moved in his expression that was the specific response of a man who had been told something about a person and was now confirming its accuracy in real time. "Right." He set his hands flat on the table. "I'm going to dispense with the preliminary material because I have the sense that you have been briefed to a level that makes it redundant. Is that accurate?" "Caldwell briefed me this morning, yes." "Then you know the scope of what was recovered. The chip, the network, Marsh, the list." He paused. 47 people. "I know. What you may not know," Hargrove said, "is that the intelligence recovered from Marsh's network, specifically from the data on that chip and from his preliminary cooperation this afternoon, has provided us with the identity of 2 additional foreign intelligence assets operating within U.S. military infrastructure. Assets we did not know existed." He let that settle. "The full operational value of what you enabled in the last 24 hours is significant, Nurse Foster. More significant than can be fully quantified from where we're sitting today." She received that without performance. "Is there something you need from me?" Hargrove looked at Caldwell, then back at her. "We would like to discuss with you the possibility of a more formal arrangement. A return to active operational status with a framework that reflects the particular nature of your capabilities and your current life circumstances." He paused. "Full operational authority, direct reporting line, no committee oversight on field decisions." She recognized the terms. They were the same terms she had given Caldwell that morning in the sedan, reflected back at her as an offer. She noted that and noted what it told her about the speed and completeness of Caldwell's reporting. "I appreciate the offer," she said. "But," she looked at Hargrove. She looked at the room. She thought about Alvarado and his gauze and his 3 weeks of slowly becoming less afraid of the job. She thought about Calloway in Bay 2, who was scared and managing it badly and who needed someone to sit in the room with him at 2 in the morning. She thought about Rourke, who was alive asking questions at an exhausting rate because the surgery had gone right and the people in the building had held the line. She thought about Coast and the 3 names she said sometimes when she needed to say something true, and the 5 years of carrying a weight she now understood differently, not as failure, but as evidence. Evidence that the work she did with her hands close to people in the specific ordinary moments of their hardest days was not the lesser version of what she was. It was the truest version. "The answer is no," she said, "and it's going to stay no." The room was very quiet for a moment. "Nurse Foster," the legal person began. "I'm a nurse at this facility," she said. Her voice was even and certain and entirely without apology. "I'm good at it. The people in my ward need someone who is good at it, and I intend to continue being that person." She looked at Hargrove directly. "What I did last night and this morning, I did because it was in front of me and it needed doing. That's all. It wasn't a demonstration of availability. It wasn't an audition." She paused. "I'll be on shift at 0600. Hargrove studied her for a long moment. In his face was the assessment of a man who was accustomed to people wanting things from him, who had structured most of his professional relationships around that dynamic, and who was now sitting across from someone who genuinely did not want what he was offering, and had no secondary agenda behind the refusal. "All right," he said, slowly, with the weight of someone who was revising a plan in real time and accepting the revision. "All right." He nodded once. "Then we're done here." She stood. "Nurse Foster." His voice stopped her at the door. She turned. He was looking at her with an expression that had changed, less assessment, more direct, more personal. "For the record, what you did in this facility over this last 24 hours, the scope of it, the quality of it. I've been in this work for 34 years. He paused. "It was exceptional." She held his gaze. "Thank you, General," she said. "So was the surgery." She walked out. The corridor was quiet in the specific way of a building at the end of a long day, staff transitioning between shifts, the sounds of the facility settling into its night rhythm. She walked through it the same way she always walked through it, without hurry, without performance. Just a person moving through a building she knew on her way to wherever the next thing was. Caldwell caught her at the elevator. He fell into step beside her and rode down without speaking until the ground floor, and then he said quietly, "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're staying." "I know," she said. "Is there anything you need from me, from the program, from anyone?" She thought about it for a moment. "The three people from Coast," she said. "Their families. I want to know that someone is taking care of what they need." "Done," he said, without hesitation, without qualification. "Done." She nodded. She walked toward the east exit. "Emily?" He said her name the way people said it when they were saying goodbye to something, not just a person. She turned. He was standing in the lobby with his hands in his pockets and the expression of a man who had spent 14 months trying to fix something and had found the peace he needed in a place he hadn't thought to look. "Thank you," he said. She pushed through the east door and walked out into the evening. The desert air was cooler now, the flat bright of the day giving way to the specific quality of desert dusk, the sky moving through colors it only produced at this hour. She stood for a moment outside the east entrance and breathed it in. Somewhere behind her, the hospital was doing what hospitals did, continuing constant, full of people who were hurt, and people who were helping them, the machine of it running through the night without pause or sentiment, asking only that the people inside it show up and do the work. She had 8 hours before 0600. She had gauze to restock in the morning. She had a patient in Bay 2 who was scared and managing it badly. And Okafor was good, but she was going to need backup on the 2 a.m. call. She had a ward full of people who needed a nurse who was fully present, fully capable, and fully committed to the specific, irreplaceable work of showing up for someone in the worst moments of their life and holding the line until they could hold it themselves. She turned and looked at the building one more time, at the light in the ward window on the 3rd floor, steady and constant, the same light that had been there every night she had walked in and every night she had walked out. She had been many things. She had done work that would never be in any public record that had cost her things. She was still on certain mornings, still counting. She had been 6. She had been an operator, a combat medic, a person who existed in plain sight as something less than she was. But she was Emily Foster. She was the nurse on Ward 3, and that was not the lesser version of what she was. It was exactly, completely, and without qualification who she had chosen to be, and she had just proven to everyone who needed to know it that the choosing was the bravest thing she had ever done.